Heat exhaustion. Just sleep it off. My husband coldly declared to me, 9 months pregnant, as he forbade me from using the air conditioner in the scorching summer heat. I collapsed in our 105 degrees Fahrenheit room, unable to even stand up or drink water, my consciousness fading away. Then he left for a vacation. 3 days later, when my husband returned from his enjoyable trip, he found our home in a miserable state, filled with the stench of decay. But that was just the beginning of the hell he was about to experience. I married Niall, my husband 5 years my senior, when I was 28. About a year later, I discovered I was pregnant, something we'd been hoping for. Though his mother lived nearby, we didn't interact much, but she was delighted to hear about her first grandchild. To everyone else, we seemed like the perfect couple. But even in our happy life, I had a worry. My husband was incredibly stingy. When we were dating, Niall seemed kind and understanding. I fell in love with that man and decided to marry him, but once we started living together, his personality completely changed. Casey, the electric bill is $5 higher this month. And the grocery and household expenses are up from last month too. You're being too extravagant. What? That's just a normal fluctuation, isn't it? Everything's getting more expensive lately, we can't help it. Then use your head and find ways to economize. You're a housewife, aren't you? You're useless. Every month, my husband would meticulously check our expenses, and if he felt anything was even slightly higher, he'd invariably berate me. If I wanted something, I couldn't just buy it without Niall scolding me, so I had to check with him first. And most of the time, he'd dismiss it, saying I didn't need such things. I was starting to feel suffocated in this marriage, feeling like I was under constant surveillance. When I found out I was pregnant, I felt joy but also a twinge of anxiety. Still, I thought surely he'd change once the baby was born. I used to work full-time at a large corporation. But as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I started experiencing severe morning sickness. The doctor diagnosed it as hyperemesis gravidarum and advised me to take a leave of absence until my condition improved. That night, I told my husband what the obstetrician had said. Niall frowned. What? Absolutely not. But I can't work in this condition with all the nausea. If you take leave, that means no salary, right? That's a problem. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was more worried about the salary than my health. But my body was screaming for rest, so I had to convince Niall somehow. The morning sickness should only last another month or two, and HR said I could get sickness benefits, so we'll manage. No, it'll still be less than if you worked normally. No way. He refused to budge and shut himself in the bedroom before the conversation was even over. After much deliberation, I decided to ask my workplace for permission to work from home. For the next 2 months, until my condition stabilized, I struggled through work at home, fighting waves of nausea every day. My husband didn't say anything about this since my salary remained the same. It felt so unfair. There was a reason I felt this way. While my husband was extremely critical of our living expenses and my purchases, he was quite extravagant when it came to his own spending. He'd buy whatever he wanted on a whim, and his clothes were all brand name items. My dissatisfaction with my husband, who loosened the purse strings only for himself, kept growing. But whenever I pointed this out, he'd fly into a rage, and his bad mood would last for days, so I gradually stopped saying anything. As summer arrived, I finally entered my 9th month of pregnancy. I had started my maternity leave a little earlier and was enjoying peaceful days at home, preparing for the baby's arrival while doing housework. However, my husband seemed displeased with this situation. "The electric bill has gone up since you've been home." While he hadn't said anything when I was working from home and receiving my full salary, my maternity leave income was about 80% of my usual pay. This seemed to irk him. "Well, that can't be helped. It's hot, so we need the air conditioner this time of year." "No, we managed without the AC during the day before. Don't use it until I get home." "What? That's impossible in the middle of summer." I naturally objected, but he wouldn't budge. From that day on, I had to endure the summer heat without air conditioning. I considered secretly using the AC when my husband wasn't home, but he'd check the electric bill at the end of the month and find out, so that wasn't an option. My body temperature was already higher than usual due to being 9 months pregnant. After about a week, I collapsed with symptoms of heat exhaustion, nausea and dizziness. When my husband came home, I explained the situation. "Just sleep it off. That's impossible in this hot room. I'm worried about the baby too. Can you take me to the hospital tomorrow? I'm going on a 3-day company trip from tomorrow." So, no. I was shocked by my husband's casual words. I hadn't heard anything about a trip, and with my due date so close, he was going to be away for 3 days. Ignoring my shock, Niall cheerfully packed his bags. The next day, before leaving, he warned me, "Don't turn on the AC until I get back. The electric bill is too high. And don't you dare go to the hospital. It'll get better on its own." To prevent me from going to the hospital, he took my smartphone and placed it out of my reach before leaving. After Niall left, my condition only worsened. Eventually, I couldn't even get up or drink water. This isn't just dangerous for me, but for the baby too. I lay there, helpless and despairing in a room that had reached 105 degrees Fahrenheit. Suddenly, I noticed the intercom was ringing. It seemed I had lost consciousness, and it was already dark outside. I was too weak to get up and answer the door. But the intercom kept ringing persistently. Who could it be? As I pondered hazily, I heard a familiar voice calling my name from outside the door. With a start, I gathered my last ounces of strength and crawled to the entrance, using that voice as my guide. Just as I managed to unlock the door, I completely lost consciousness. 3 days later, my husband returned home. As soon as he opened the living room door, he covered his mouth and nose. He was retching at the terrible smell. "What's this smell of decay? And all these flies? Oh no." Niall frantically searched the room, seemingly looking for something. He returned to the living room and stared intently at the sofa and blanket I usually use when lying down. He seemed afraid to touch it. Then, as if struck by an idea, he started making a phone call. A ringtone sounded from high up in the living room. It was probably my phone he was calling. But the phone he had taken from me before leaving was still there. My husband looked around, found my smartphone, and picked it up. So, it must be. Once again, he tried to reach for the blanket on the sofa. I'm not there. Ah. Niall was so startled by my voice coming from somewhere that he lost his balance and fell onto the sofa. Then he started apologizing. I'm sorry. Did you think I was decomposing under that blanket? Huh. He looked around, then suddenly yanked off the blanket. There were just some cushions piled up underneath. Hey, where are you? My husband's voice was angry now, demanding to know where my voice was coming from. At this point, I wasn't actually in the house. I was watching what was happening inside through a baby monitor camera my colleagues had given me before my maternity leave began. I'm here. Can you hear my voice coming from that small thing next to the TV? Huh? Where are you talking from? He asked irritably. When I told him where I was, Niall rushed out of the living room. Within 30 minutes, my husband arrived where I was. Why did you go to the hospital without my permission? You disobeyed me. He shouted as soon as he saw me. I was lying in bed with an 4 drip, but my husband didn't even offer a word of comfort at the sight. Yes, this was a hospital room. A room with proper air conditioning. I'll explain later how I ended up here, but my husband started saying things like this. This is a private room, isn't it? Do you have any idea how much this costs? I didn't answer, just stared at Niall. And what's with the smell in that room? It stinks, and there are flies everywhere. We can't live there like that. Do you know how much house cleaning will cost? As my husband went on and on about money, I let out a heavy sigh. Was it really that bad? That was the leftover food you didn't clean up 3 days ago. Scrambled eggs, blueberry yogurt, what else was it? Of course it would rot if left in a room without air conditioning. You see, on that day, I was too sick to clean up Niall's leftovers. And then I was hospitalized, so everything was left on the table. Weren't you worried about me and the baby, telling us to sleep in a room hot enough to rot food? If you had cleaned up properly, there wouldn't have been a problem. You're always exaggerating things, first with morning sickness, now with the pregnancy. My husband sneered at me, saying outrageous things. I could have been the one rotting there. It was that dangerous. I was utterly disappointed in Niall. But he showed no sign of remorse. Even if you don't care about me, I can't imagine raising a child with someone who doesn't worry about their baby. What are you talking about? Are you planning to become a single mother? You can't raise a child alone. Besides, being a single parent means living in poverty. Don't you think that's pitiful for the child? Niall said with a smirk, looking down on me. How far is this man going to belittle me? Suppressing the urge to slap him, my heart was burning with a desire for revenge. Suddenly, the door to the hospital room opened, and someone walked in. My husband was surprised to see this person, his eyes widening. Mom! Why are you here? I called her. Is that a problem? Besides, she's the one who saved my life. You see, it was my mother-in-law who had rescued me from the house and got me admitted to this hospital that day. But I thought you didn't like Mom. Huh? You're the one who's been uncomfortable with your mother and avoiding her all this time, right? I've been exchanging contact information with her and keeping in touch occasionally. I never heard about that. Did I need to tell you? It seems Niall found his strict and nagging mother bothersome, but that was just her motherly love. However, unable to see that, my husband had unilaterally distanced himself from her. As for me, ever since I reported my pregnancy, I had made it a daily routine to reply to the morning emails from my mother-in-law checking on my condition. Of course, I found it difficult to consult her about my troubles with Niall's excessive frugality, but I was encouraged by her kind messages that arrived every day. On the day my husband left for his trip and took away my smartphone, I couldn't reply to my mother-in-law's email. The sudden break in our daily habit must have worried her. Concerned, she came to check on me just in case, and that's how I was discovered and rescued. It was her who had been persistently ringing the doorbell and calling out to me in my fading consciousness. Casey was in a life-threatening situation if she had stayed at home. That's an exaggeration. You almost lost your wife and child, and you're still saying such nonsense. My mother-in-law, who had heard everything from the hallway, scolded Niall. My husband backed away, intimidated by his mother's intensity. Don't interfere in our marriage. Even so, my husband retorted while trying to forcibly grab my arm and get me out of the bed, intending to discharge me and leave this place quickly. I shook off his hand. I'm divorcing you. As a father's responsibility, you'll pay child support properly. Well, I might agree to a divorce, but I won't pay any money. My husband shouted, his face red with anger, spittle flying. From there, neither of us would back down, and the conversation reached an impasse. That's when my mother-in-law pulled out a piece of paper. It's not that you won't pay, it's that you can't pay, right? What my mother-in-law thrust at my husband was a debt collection notice. How did you get that? Seeing it, my husband was visibly shaken, cold sweat breaking out on his face. Actually, my mother-in-law had found that letter in the mailbox when she rescued me. I was shocked to see this. So that's why you were so keen on saving money and wouldn't let me take time off work. You were planning to use my income to repay your debts. How I use the family's money is my business. It seemed she had hit the nail on the head. He stumbled over his words for a moment but then spat them out as if in defiance. Just then, there was a knock on the door, and a nurse came in to announce it was feeding time. My husband tilted his head in confusion. When I was brought to the hospital, I was in a critical condition. Judging that both mother and child wouldn't survive otherwise, they had performed an emergency C-section. It was all thanks to my mother-in-law finding me at that crucial moment and calling an ambulance. I had been covering my stomach with a blanket on the bed since Niall arrived, so he hadn't noticed that I had given birth. Pay off your own debts with your own efforts. Because of your selfishness, we were put in mortal danger. You don't deserve to be a father. Sensing my firm resolve for divorce from my expression, my husband suddenly became flustered. I was wrong. I'll apologize, so let's reconsider the divorce. It's too late. I've been patient for so long, but this incident has completely drained my love for you. Please, don't abandon me. Mom, say something to her. Niall, now in tears, turned to his mother for help. I'm on Casey's side. I don't care about you anymore. No. Mom, Casey, please don't abandon me. A father like you is worse than no father at all. I'll raise the child on my own. When I firmly rejected and pushed away my husband, he was dragged out of the hospital room by his mother. After that, Niall reluctantly signed the divorce papers. I hired a lawyer and made sure to establish a proper agreement for child support payments, securing a promise of $700 per month until the child turns 18. Without my income that he had been counting on, my ex-husband quickly ran into trouble repaying his debts and was evicted from our apartment. Now, it seems he's sleeping in the park and working day and night, trapped in a cycle of debt. As for me, I'm managing quite well with my own income and the child support, enjoying a life with more freedom and less stress than before. My mother-in-law still visits every 2 weeks as the child's grandmother, maintaining our relationship. I hope to continue watching my child grow alongside her.